This video demonstrates the ability of mechanisms within PTC CREO to create moving gear assemblies. So we've already selected a working directory. And it's my ME470 class is the working directory, so I'll click OK. And I'm going to make a new assembly, and I'll call it gear mech. Okay, so now we're in the assembly. I've already created my subcomponents, so what we're going to do in this assembly is we're going to make a ring gear that's stationary, and a sun gear and planetary gear set that are moving around with that stationary ring gear. So since the ring gear is what's stationary, I'm going to bring it in first. So assemble, and it's going to be called ring. So we'll bring that in. And since this is the first part and it's not going to be moving, we're going to make it be the default constraint. And there's my first component. The next component I'm going to bring in is a part I've called the yoke. So this part has 3 tabs. It's going to rotate in the center, and this is what the planet gears are going to be attached to. So let me zoom in here now. And I want this to be a pinned connection. When I created the yoke assembly, I went ahead and put axes on the assembly. So you can see there's the axis for the ring gear, and there's the axis for the yoke. I'm going to use a mechanism, a connection. We'll do a pinned connection. And for the assembly, we'll use the axis, and for the component we'll use the axis of the gear, of the yoke. And now that I've got that aligned, we've automatically jumped. We've done the axis alignment, now we're doing the translation alignment. We'll do the top face of the yoke with the bottom face of the ring. Alright, so we've got our first component laid. The only thing it's allowed to do at this point is to rotate. So if I drag component, I can see I can rotate it around. And that's all we wanted to be able to do at this point. Okay, next thing I want to do is to bring in one of the planet gears. So assemble. And the planet gears end up being the same diameters as the sun gear in this particular example. So I'm just going to bring in another instance of a sun gear. Again, we're going to do a pinned connection. And for placement, let's see. If I click on component item, I'm going to choose something so I can select that center axis. And then for the assembly item, I'm going to choose the face, the round part of the yoke. For the translation now, let's see. We'll use this top face and the bottom face. And now it's fully constrained from that point of view. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK to accept that. Now I have 2 things that can happen. If I drag components, first off, if I drag something kind of near the center, I'm moving the yoke so it can still rotate. And if I grab another point near the end here, I can also rotate the gear. Okay. Now, for what we're going to do with the gear, we're actually not going to try to make it rotate perfectly. Instead, what we're going to do is kind of approximate the initial orientation. So these are not real gears, obviously, so they're just something to show that rotation is occurring. I'm going to go back into drag components, and before I move forward, I'm going to align the gear the way I want it to be. So I think what I want to do is have an opening there. So obviously this isn't a perfect alignment, but it's close enough to be able to see the motion of the part. So we'll let that be satisfactory for what we're doing. The next step is to go ahead and add a mechanism. By the way, I've added two connections. Let me go back and review. If I right click on the yoke and go back and edit the yoke, we'll see that the name of that connection is connection 1. It's a pinned connection. Okay, so canceling that, and now if I go into the sun and edit its constraints and look at the placement, this is connection 2. Okay, so we're just going to keep that straight for ourselves. Now what I want to do next is I'm going to go to the Applications tab and begin the mechanism. Okay, now that we've entered the Mechanism tab, the first thing we're going to do is click the Gears Generator. We're going to leave it as a generic gear set, and for gear 1, we're going to choose the connection attached to the planetary gear. We're going to set a diameter of 1.083. That's what's calculated as the pitch diameter of this particular gear. And then for gear 2, for the motion axis, we'll set the center of the planetary gear set and a diameter of 3.25. Now it's drawn the gears for us, so you can see it is drawing a circle of 3.25 for one and another circle of 1.083 for the other, so it shows us that we've got our gears set up the right way. And the only other choice we have to make is what's going to be considered the ground and what's going to be considered moving. So in gear 1, you've got a body 1 and a body 2, and you can switch which one of them is the pinion and which one of them is the carrier. We want the gear to be the carrier, to be the pinion, and I believe that's body 2, and we want the carrier to be the yoke, that's body 1. For gear 2, we want the pinion to be body 1, and we want the carrier to be the ground. So that looks right. I'm going to click Apply and OK. So we've created a gear, and if you look under the mechanism tree, there's now a gear pair 1 that exists there. And if I click the drag components and grab a portion of this, it now is moving as a connection. Alright, so there's our first connection. And with that, we're going to exit mechanisms and begin to continue to put things in. So I'm going to close the mechanism toolbox. So we're back to just the regular window. And under the Model tab, we'll do Assemble. I'm going to add another sun gear, open, and again we're going to do a pinned connection, and the placement this time will be, let's see, it looks like I don't see my other sun gear that we've put in. There it is. Okay. For the assembly item, I'm going to be very careful to make sure I choose the assembly, the axis that belongs to the ring gear for that component, as opposed to the axis that belongs to the yoke. And for this component item, I'm going to need to grab that axis that runs through the center of the gear. There we go. For translation, we'll let the top of the sun gear be coincident with the top of the ring gear. And we'll click the check to be finished. Now before I go back into mechanisms and start my next mechanism, I am going to rotate around and make sure that my gears are aligned the way I want to. And actually this is pretty close to how I was going to do it. So I'm going to leave it just like this, where the connection of the V's are basically matching each other. Okay. So back to Applications, back to Mechanisms. Notice the one gear is still set up, and we're ready to enter in a new gear. So for gear 1, I'm going to choose the highest, and notice it's connection 3. That's the last connection I just made. So that's one gear, and this is going to be 1.083. And for gear 2, we'll choose the second connection. Okay, and that's going to be 1.083. And when I hit tab off of this, it should draw those two gears. Notice there's a red one and a green one. That looks like it's going to be okay, so I'm going to click Apply and OK, and drag components again, and let's see what happens now if we move this. Alright, so we've got a functioning assembly with moving parts. Now the next thing I need to do to finish this is to finish putting in the planetary gear sets. So to do that, I really need to close out of mechanisms again, and instead of doing patterns, so a lot of times on this particular case we would go ahead and do a pattern, and we would make 3 of these. We'd put them 120 degrees apart, and that would put all 3 of them there. It turns out when you do the joining of that pattern, these pattern components do not rotate with the mechanism like they need to. So what's going to need to happen is I need to bring them in individually. So I'm going to go ahead and do one more. I'll do assembly, another sun gear coming in. So open, and again that sun gear is now on the screen somewhere. There it is. For placement, I'm already in the alignment of that, and we're connecting them to the yoke, so I can choose the surface of the yoke and the surface of the planetary gear, and we'll make those be coincident. And now since I started using the yoke, I need to finish using the yoke for the I wasn't paying attention and I did not make this a pin. So let's switch this to a pin. Axis alignment is now the two axes that I've selected, and the translation, which is what I'm working on now, I'm going to make the bottom of the planetary gear set coincident with the top of the yoke. Okay, so that finishes that. I'll click OK. So the last step before making a new mechanism with this planetary gear set is to position the gear so it's aligned. And again, this is a bit of a manual manipulation. I'm not being terribly precise about this, but I'm going to go ahead and drag components and drag this particular gear, and again it's becoming more and more difficult to do that, into place there. That looks like it's fairly aligned. And now we're ready to go into applications and mechanisms again. We've already created the other gear sets, so it's just continuing on. So I'm going to create a gear for gear 1. We're going to let the pin joint be the same one as it was before, this connection 3. And again, 1.083. For gear 2, we'll let it be the new one we just created, and 1.083, and apply and OK. And let's see what we've got now. So we're going to rotate a little bit more toward the top and drag components, and I should be able to move everything nicely together. Okay, I could repeat this process for the third gear, and that would give me for the third planetary gear set, and that would give me a full working planetary gear set.